Hi, everyone. My name is Daniel Moyer. I'm one of the trainers here at Briggs Stratton Energy Solutions. We're joined here today by Nathan Heston. Nathan, hello.
Hi, Daniel. Good morning. Good afternoon to all of you that are out there. Good morning to all of you that are out there, depending on where you are. This is a fun topic, and Daniel and I really enjoy covering this. Daniel, what are we covering today?
Really, in a lot of ways, we're covering the future of what the grid is going to look like, our electrical grid, how solar batteries are going to play a larger role in the stability of our grid and the mix of how we're going to generate and store energy as well. A couple of housekeeping items. This is a NAPSUP accredited course. Our email will pop up at the end of this talk, and please email us your full name, spell it out for us, and we'll be sure to issue those credits via email
Hey,
after the
Daniel,
talk.
I want to point out to everyone that the chat is disabled, but we do have a Q&A section, and we'd love to have your questions, comments throughout the talk. Daniel, I'll try to read those out, interrupt you as those come in, just so that you know. So go ahead and focus on the slides. For those of you that are there, find the Q&A section of your Zoom menu.
Thank you, Nathan. Additionally, all of the slides will be emailed out to you, and so will the recording as well. Starting off really quick, just highlighting some upcoming events that we have going on. The Energy Expo down in Florida will be coming up August 20th and 21st. We'll be at booth 145. I get to go out to Hawaii. Thank you, Nathan, for letting me go. We're going to be having the HICEA conference. That's going to be coming up in August as well. Lastly, the big one, RE Plus will be in Las Vegas this year, September 8th through 11th. We have a booth at the booth numbers there. We also usually get free expo passes, not the full conference passes, but if you want to go to RE Plus in Vegas and want to be our guest, please email us when the email pops up at the end, and we'll be sure to get you a free pass so you can join us there as well. NEM 3.0, Nathan. So really, we're going to jump into what is net metering, what does it look like, but really I want to just take a step back here and talk a little bit about some of the changes that have just come into place with the ITC.
So the big beautiful bill has changed the ITC, right? So what we're going to talk about here is a summary of some of the changes that have happened. And so that ITC is traditionally given back since it was started, 30% returns on battery installs, right? Solar installs, renewable energy installs, even things like hot water heaters or devices that make your home more energy efficient. So what's changing?
Well, a lot's changed. I will start off with this. We are not tax advisors, so the information on this slide should not be taken as tax advice. Please contact your tax attorney or tax advisor. What's changed, Nathan, is that the residential tax credit is going away. If you're going to try and claim the residential 30% tax credit for solar or storage, it has to be installed by the end of 2025, so the end of this year. There's
So
no
a system has to be fully installed by December 31st, 2025.
Yeah, and that's an interesting thing. So if you read the actual text of the bill, it says when the original installation of the item is completed. And a lot of what I'm talking about, I got from a California Solar and Storage Association webinar that they had done and some fact sheets available. So that means that it has to be fully installed and fully paid for, but they don't think that it necessarily needs permission to operate, or the interconnection agreement doesn't necessarily have to be in place.
And
There's
so Daniel, just to be clear, so we're talking about residential right now, and by they, you're talking about the CALSA advisors that you have been listening to and their interpretation. Is that correct?
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
Unlike the commercial ITC, there's no safe harboring pathway. So when we jump down to the commercial ITC, and just so we're clear on what's commercial, what's residential, Nathan, um, some people might think commercial has to be a three-phase power. It doesn't necessarily. It can be a split-phase system. It's that the person or the entity that's taking the tax credit has to essentially have an EIN number, not a social security number.
So it's that employer identification number. So when you're filing your taxes, you have to be filing as a business entity, right?
That's right. And under that pathway, you can, if you complete the installation by the end of 2027, you can still take the 30% tax credit. There's another pathway, safe harboring by starting construction. And we don't have the time here to define all of exactly what that is, but essentially you got to be moving along on this and then show continuous progress. And if anybody's interested in getting more firm definition on that, California Solar and Storage Association is again has a webinar, and there's other fact sheets. I would say that a lot of the other solar and storage associations around the country, including the national one, SIA, does have more language on this if you want to dive deeper. But you essentially got to start construction and show continual progress. Under that, though, you have to follow what are known as the FEOC rules, and this is the Foreign Entities of Concern. Just to start off, any FEOC entity, which essentially is China for the most part, they're the one who produces a lot of this equipment. There are some others, Russia, Iran, North Korea. We're not seeing a lot of equipment coming out of there. But to start off, a FEOC cannot take the tax credit. Then, if somebody who is eligible to take the tax credit, the systems must have a minimum percentage of components by value that are not made essentially in China. And you can see down on the right-hand side, this chart of the minimum non-FEOC content. Now, I just want to be everyone to certain the residential, this doesn't apply to residential because the residential is going away. This is applying to the commercial side of things, somebody that has an EIN number.
So, Daniel, it's worth noting here that this is starting in 2026, right? So currently, there is not this requirement, right, to have a certain percentage. But starting in 2026, storage has to have 55% U.S. content. Solar panels have to have 40% U.S. content, or solar equipment has to have 40% U.S. content, right? And those numbers actually increase going forward. So I know the topic here is NEM 3.0. We are going to cover that, but certainly these are big changes that are happening to incentives that can increase the cost of solar systems for the end user or the end purchaser. And so I think one of the things that I see about this is that those of us that might want residential storage systems, if we want to take advantage of that 30% tax credit, we have to complete our system by December 31st, which means really, like Daniel, I don't have one of my current residents. I need to get going on this if I want to claim that tax credit.
Yeah, and Briggs Stratton Energy Solutions is here. We have products in stock at our distributors ready to go. So we're able to provide those systems. I would encourage everybody, get out, make sure you articulate the value of moving quickly with any of your customers, your homeowners. Get these projects sold, get them completed. Again, you don't necessarily need PTO according to California Solar and Storage Association. Get them in, get that 30% available to your homeowners. So Nathan, we spend a lot of time on this slide, and I think it's always a good slide to kind of set the stage here, but I want to move a little quickly because we've got a lot of content.
Sure, I'd be happy to take us through it. Let's first look at what we've got here. So an energy storage system essentially means a battery system that's capable of storing energy, whether it be from the grid or other sources, to back up the home, right? And this is to be able to use that energy when the demand is there. So there are some times in your, when your home doesn't need a large amount of electricity, and there are other times when it might. Right? And so we can store it in batteries, but the challenge with batteries is they're DC electrical sources, right? Solar panels and batteries both produce DC electricity, and so we need an inverter, something that's capable of converting between DC electricity from solar and batteries and producing that AC electricity that most of the loads in our home consume. Now that inverter is kind of at the heart of the system, and one of the things it needs to be able to do is manage those different power sources. So when that solar power is producing more than the loads of the house, that excess energy can be used to sell back to the grid. So you can sell that excess energy back to the grid, or you could store that energy in a battery and then use that when the demand is there for the home. And I think what you're going to do today, Daniel, is take us through the financial reasons, at least in California and increasingly in other places across the country, of why you would store that excess energy in a battery and use it yourself as opposed to selling it back to the grid. So we're going to get into that.
Absolutely. Keep in mind that we also sell generators. Generators can also be a mix in this to provide extra levels of resiliency in grid down situations. But you're right, Nathan. We're going to focus on mainly when the grid is up. Now, Nathan, we went on to the internet this morning and we looked at yesterday's daily energy mix for California and yesterday's energy mix for the entire US grid. Can you walk us a little bit through what these two pie charts on the left are telling
Yeah,
us?
so let's look at the one in the upper left-hand corner. So what this is the daily generation of electricity over the 24-hour period yesterday, right? So in California. So we're looking at all of the sources of electricity that contributed to the electricity that was pulled off the grid. So the sources that are putting electricity onto the grid, if we look at solar and solar with integrated battery storage, we're looking at 31% of the electricity over the 24-hour period, right, was produced by solar, right? That's a significant, almost a third. And then if we add wind in there, we get another 13% of yesterday's electricity in California produced was from wind. If we also look, there was hydroelectricity generated from water going through turbines. If we look at all of those combined, solar, wind, and hydro, all these renewable sources, we can include geothermal in there, is more than 50% of the electricity in California was coming from renewable sources. That's
Yesterday.
yeah, yesterday. And that's pretty incredible how this has changed over the last few decades, right? Really the last decade. Now, natural gas is producing about a third of the electricity still in California, but coal only 1%. And nuclear, Daniel, that's about 5 miles from me. The last nuclear plant in California is Diablo Canyon. It's producing about 7% of the electricity of the entire state. Let's compare this with the national generation mix. So all of the electricity produced over the 24-hour period of yesterday, right? So this comes from different sources. About 7% of the United States electricity yesterday was produced by solar. Another 10% was produced by wind. Natural gas is the biggest one there, Daniel. That's pretty incredible. We've really seen since 1950 this shift from coal to rapid growth in natural gas. There's always been that hydroelectric, right? But that we can't really create more rivers and dams, right? There's only a certain amount of water that's kind of flowing into these dams. But the demand for electricity has grown. So other sources need to grow. So if we look at the coal, what is really incredible is only less than a fifth of the country's electricity was coming from coal. If we go back 50 years ago, more than half of electricity was coming from coal, even 25 years ago.
So as we're looking at that pie chart on the left, Nathan, as you mentioned, that we have a lot of renewables. And one of the issues specifically with solar is that it's an intermittent power source. So as we kind of shift our gaze over to the right-hand side of the slide, we can see that big yellow chunk right in the middle of the day. That's all solar production. What's been really unique, and this has just happened in the last few years, is that we're able to now use that solar to power loads of the state's electrical grid during the day, but then also store it in batteries and then discharge those batteries to supply peak loads. And this was back in April of this year, a little bit, just a couple months ago, during a certain time frame, right, as the sun was setting, batteries peaked at over 34% of the supply of the entire state's electrical demand. That is pretty incredible. And what this allows us to do is to be able to kind of not have to have such intermittent swings in our power generation and be able to supply that battery, significant amount of battery discharge to the electrical grid in California.
So
Now,
Daniel,
Nathan,
just to
go
make
ahead.
it clear here for me, make sure I know what I'm looking at. So when I'm looking at this graph, we're looking at the power production from different sources. Now, batteries don't produce electricity, right? So some of that solar demand during the day is going into charging those batteries, right? So some of the demand on the grid is the batteries. But if we also look at the solar, I can see around 10 or 11 a.m., the solar is producing, looks like about 17 gigawatts worth of electricity when the total demand is less than 25. So there's, certainly solar is producing a large fraction of that energy, and some of that is being saved up in the batteries. And I would ask you, where do you think this energy, and I understand you might not have all the information, but where do you think this energy is being stored? Is this residential energy storage? Is this grid?
Yeah, you're right, Nathan. I don't have the exact, and I'll look into this, but I believe I would suspect a lot of this is utility scale storage as well.
So, Daniel, one thing that is missing from this graph is people charging their electric vehicles. So there's another way that energy is stored, and it's not necessarily, it doesn't get reflected because it's not being used on the grid anymore. But I often will charge my electric vehicle prior to 3 p.m. because the electric rates, from early morning all the way up until 3 p.m. are the cheapest for me. So we're also storing energy in batteries that are not producing electricity on the grid. And I see more and more electric vehicles. I hear more and more electric vehicles driving around parking lots, that kind of thing.
Or
Um,
you don't hear.
so batteries. Oh, they make that humming sound,
Yeah.
right? So batteries are certainly accounting for us storing more and more energy. And I would argue with the growth of electric vehicles, that not only will we see electricity being stored for discharge onto the grid or for home loads, we're also going to see it stored for transportation needs that can occur any time of day as well.
Yeah, and so I think the key though is that with this change to a NEM 3.0, the net billing tariff, what the utilities and the CPUC is doing is trying to encourage the adoption of batteries. Now, we have a slide where we talked about the pros and cons of what happened with the NEM 2.0 to NEM 3.0 transition. Before we get there, really quickly, Nathan, I just want to talk about, we kind of talked about this before. We have partial home backup and whole home backup. The idea that a lot of systems are going to whole home backup because of less expensive batteries, more expensive inverters. Even if in a partial home backup, though, we can still discharge our batteries to cover our home loads in a grid up situation using CTs. So I think
Mhm.
that's the takeaway on this one, is that we have, although two separate architectures here, some of the concepts we're talking about, discharging batteries to home's load, can still apply to partial home
So
backup.
Daniel, we're using the term here, home battery backup, and that kind of signifies that the batteries are just there waiting for an outage, ready to kind of back up the home. So what happens in a grid down situation?
The transfer switch or the MIDI inside the solar or the hybrid inverter isolates us from grid, so there's no risk of us backfeeding the grid.
So, in a lot of cases, we're not just doing backup with batteries. A generator is there for backup, right? It waits for the grid to go down and then it backs up the house. It'll start up and back up the house. And so Briggs and Stratton is there. What's different about a battery, though, is that it can interact with the grid. You can sell back to the grid. And I think you're going to talk about some financial incentives in California and times that you might want to sell battery power back to the grid. But you can also, even when the grid is up, you can use your battery to cover your own loads, right? And reduce your electric bill. So that interactivity, that flexibility of battery energy storage, I think is where the value is. What's the difference between the partial home and the whole home battery backup?
Well, the cost of the system is one. The amount of batteries and the power output of the inverter would be less. And Nathan, I really like what you mentioned with this grid interactive. And the topic today really is not only can we do the discharge it during night loads, but we're going to store our electricity when it would otherwise be worthless to be sent back to the grid.
Got it. So yeah, the isolation there from the grid in an outage is one thing, but the interaction with the grid is what we're going to focus on today. This ability to make your solar system pay for itself.
Yeah, that's a good point. The financials of these systems has changed in California, where you can still see a financial return, a payback period on a solar only system, but by adding storage, you're going to accelerate that payback period, even with it costing more with the cost of the batteries.
Yeah, so Daniel, I mean, if we do a solar only system where it's a solar and maybe micro inverters or solar and a string inverter, and we don't add batteries into the mix, the real way your paying for your system, or you're getting a return on investment, is to consume that electricity that you're producing, right? So
during
what
the day.
during the day, and you've got to do it when the electricity is being produced. Otherwise, you're selling back to the grid at what we're going to show you, very low costs.
And that might work for a retired couple or people that work from home that spend a lot of time at home that can do their laundry during the day, consume maybe like you had mentioned, charge your car during the day. But a lot of us, work, go to school, and we come home at night, and that's when we consume electricity. And I have some illustrations later about the demand and production curves and how we can better align them as well.
So what are you showing here?
Well, I want to just make sure everybody has an understanding of what net metering policies are. Essentially, it's a contract between you and the utility on what you're going to be paid for when you export electricity onto the grid. Under NEM 1.0, NEM 2.0, it was a one-to-one. So for every kilowatt hour you sent to the grid, you get one credit of kilowatt hour coming back to you at night or in the winter. Whereas NEM 3.0, it's going to put a value on that kilowatt hour, and it's the wholesale electricity the moment you inject it into the grid. And I got a chart coming up to show us exactly what that value is. So with this new net metering 3.0, it's really changing, as we mentioned, the whole economics of how residential solar is working, that you now need to add a battery to it. Other states are coming there. Illinois, Indiana, Arizona, Hawaii actually has been this way long before California. So they're experts in this, in Utah. But there's other states that have varying net metering policies, and there's other states that are starting to transition over to this new kind of paradigm of net billing tariff and not that net energy metering. So the
So
chart here,
Daniel, let me
yeah.
let me let me break this down for myself here, just so I make sure I understand. Earlier at the beginning of the slide, you talked about, incentives to get people to add energy storage. And we're talking here about compensation from utility for putting solar on the grid during the day. Um, and it seems to me that the utility companies want batteries. They don't necessarily want more solar coming onto the grid because they don't seem to be compensating for that solar, but they offer incentives for battery storage. Why do you think that is? I mean, what is it about the utility that, they don't want lots of extra solar coming onto the grid during the day, but they do want you to have storage during the night? Why is it difficult for utilities, or why financially is it maybe advantageous for them to have customers with batteries?
Well, I think it's the idea that you need to be able to have a non-intermittent power supply. So if imagine a utility here in California has to run a power plant idle all day and then ramp that power plant up at night. And I would maybe back up my statement a little, Nathan. I think what they're maybe trying to encourage is by requiring batteries to have a financial incentive that might price out some customers from who would otherwise have just been fine with solar. Now they have to do batteries. It's too expensive. So I think the power companies want to hold the power in a lot of ways. But what they're also kind of a byproduct of what they're doing by essentially forcing people to have batteries is that it allows people for grid defection. Once they have a reasonable size solar, a reasonable size of batteries, essentially people don't really need the electrical grid anymore, except maybe in a big long winter storm.
Yeah, and I was leading with this question a little bit. I don't want to take too much time here because I want to get into some more meat of the material. But one of the things that's very difficult for those that are generating, the power companies that are generating electricity, is to go ramp up and down with demand, right? So when everybody comes home at roughly the same time at 5:30 p.m. and kicks on the air conditioner in the house, the demand spikes, right? And it takes minutes to fractions of an hour to change the amount of power that's being pushed onto the grid. And so batteries offer a level of stability, right? These demand spikes that occur are much less when customers have battery storage, because their batteries can cover their spikes. And so the utility doesn't have to do that. And so this is maybe one of the reasons why, they're rewarding customers with batteries. And we can benefit from it. There are time of use opportunities for us as well. We'll talk about that later.
Yeah, and just looking quickly at the graphs, the gray line here is essentially the load profile of a home. The orange is the solar production. So right in the middle of the day, the solar is producing. When we're able to have a battery added to the mix, we're going to still have the solar covering the home's loads during the day, but this whole upper chunk, we're going to transition it into the evening to power the loads in the afternoon.
So Daniel, if you don't mind going back to that chart just real quick, we're looking at power versus time, and the area under a power versus time graph is energy, right? And so essentially, you would like the area under your solar. Now, should be accounted for that summer you're going to produce more than you will in winter, et cetera. But the area under the solar, if that accounts for the entire area of your demand profile, then you would essentially be you would be producing all the electricity you consume, right? And so by overproducing more than the demand of the house during the day, you can store that extra energy and cover some of the demand in the night and then morning time when solar is not there.
Yep. And when you had the grid as your battery, you would simply export that and be able to use that. So, with the solar only system, the homeowner doesn't have that ability to shift that storage to power the home's load later in the day, right? It's only whenever the solar is producing, they're going to be sending it back to the grid or powering the home's loads. But with able to combine a battery and solar, that's where you're going to see the maximum bill reduction. So Nathan, we got some graphs coming up, but you're on a time of use, right? And just everyone's clear. I understand a lot of people on this call probably aren't from California. But as I mentioned, these time of use rates where electricity
Yep.
is more expensive is coming. And also this net metering change is coming as well. So Nathan, talk us through, you're on a time of use and everybody who goes solar in California is forced onto a time of use rate.
Yeah, so I don't have solar on the house yet. I do plan to have it on and claim that tax credit by the end of the year, so I've got to move. But I do have an electric vehicle, right? And so we can charge up that electric vehicle off the grid. And so what we do is we program the car to only charge during the off-peak rates. So just to give everybody a rough idea, between midnight and noon, or midnight and 3 p.m., we can buy electricity at 31 cents per kilowatt hour. Between 3 and 6 p.m., we can buy electricity at 51 cents per kilowatt hour. And between 6 p.m. and midnight, that's the peak rate for the utilities. I pay 62 cents per kilowatt hour there. So in exchange for getting electricity at a lower rate, like 31 cents, I'm willing to pay that high rate in the evening because I just try to have very little demand during that time. I'll often turn off the hot tub. I definitely don't charge the vehicle between 3 and midnight. But if I had a battery on the house, right, I could make sure that I never bought electricity during those hours.
And
So that's an important point.
yeah, thank you, Nathan. And just to be clear, there's many different time of use windows and rates. So although the times maybe didn't match up with Nathan said, this is just one example. I believe there's like 4 or 5 different time of use rate structures that have different times that they come into
Yeah,
play.
and what I'm saying too is that I can save money by adding batteries even without adding solar, right? So I certainly want to add solar just because we've got a lot of sun here on the Central Coast in California. And solar panels are now just so cheap, right? It makes sense if you're going to put in an energy storage system to take advantage of solar as long as you've got the available roof space and the sunlight to do it. What's this, Daniel? And
So
we keep using this term NEM. What is NEM, net energy metering?
yeah,
And so
exactly.
that
Net energy metering. So the idea that you could send a kilowatt hour to the grid, and then you could consume that kilowatt hour in the summer, in the winter, and here in California, it was an annual true up. So if I sized your solar only system correctly, it would produce a lot during the summer, more than your home consumes. And then you would use up those credits in winter. And if it's done correctly, sized correctly, at the anniversary of when I installed your system, you would get a true up bill from the utility. And ideally, you would owe the utility nothing, and the utility would owe you nothing.
so basically net energy metering means you just pay the difference. The difference between the number of kilowatt hours you've used and the number of kilowatt hours you generated, right? That changed last year. What is NEM 3.0, or what do we mean? And is it really NEM anymore?
It technically is still called NEM Net Metering 3.0, but the proper, I think, word would be net billing tariff. So just taking a step back, the reason this was even introduced was to really encourage the adoption of solar. At that time, as you pointed out, Nathan, some of the fossil fuels dominated the energy mix of our grid. And so this was an idea to push the renewables, give them a chance to compete, and allowing that one-to-one credit. Back in 2013, we switched it around a little bit. We switched to NEM 2.0. It was essentially the same thing, although you did have to pay a little bit for the interconnection fee, which is when you get your solar, you got to tell the utility what you're doing and file for that interconnection agreement. And then also they're still charging you a little bit every month as well. And then also pushed you on to the time of use rates that we talked about earlier. But the NEM 3.0 really is this net billing tariff. So the idea is it went from net energy to net billing, so that instead of being credited at a kilowatt hour versus kilowatt hour, what we're doing now is we're going to give you monetary value for that kilowatt hour when you inject it into the grid, and then charge a different, much higher monetary value when you consume that kilowatt hour when you're bringing it from the grid to the home.
So
So
Daniel, I'd like to address the term net here. So net billing here is essentially it's definitely not as advantageous to the consumer, right? So with the consumer, when it was net energy metering, it's really, you're just paying the difference in the number of kilowatt hours you use versus the number of kilowatt hours you generate. Essentially, as you said earlier, you're using the grid as your battery. You put some kilowatt hours into the bank, you draw some kilowatt hours off for your loads, you pay the difference. Now, net billing, well, it really is just a bill, right? It's a bill and you get some credit. It's small, but you get some credit for putting electricity onto the grid. It's bigger at different times, and I think you're going to get into that. But at the end of the month, you're getting a bill, and it's no longer an annualized true up anymore. And without a battery, it becomes very difficult to make this work financially for a return on investment. That's the point of this. I think talk is to show how that's the case in California. It's not the case around the country. There are some places around the country that do net energy metering still, but we've seen increasingly it being phased out in different locations.
and that's an
Hawaii in
opportunity.
the
Yeah,
in California especially, right?
yeah, and that's an opportunity for people that are in states that haven't done this. Let's get people on board because it could be in jeopardy. This kind of talks about why the utilities wanted to make this change, and they lobbied really hard with the CPUC, or California Public Utilities Commission. And one of the ones we talked about earlier, Nathan, is the idea that during the day, so much solar was being sent back out onto the grid in California that actually the price of electricity went negative. That was the argument that a lot of the utilities made, and they always kind of call it the duck curve because it kind of looks like a duck a little bit right
So
here.
if you're a utility and you have a power plant, maybe a natural gas power plant, and you're running it, and then there's not enough demand on the grid to pull off all the solar that's being pushed onto the grid and pull off the electricity that the natural gas plant is producing, you have to shut down the natural gas plant, right?
Or pay to someone to take it from you.
So what a negative electricity rate is hey, it's not a good thing for a utility to have to shut down a natural gas plant. So we're actually going to pay you to take our electricity. And load dumps occur in many places across the US, right? There are times when wind farms are kicking at the same time that hydroelectric dams need to discharge electricity. I mean, this in the Northwest happens, right? In Oregon, certain times of the year. Wind is high and water levels are high. And so there can be conflicts about this. So what the duck curve is here, Daniel, we're looking at the gigawatts of electricity being produced at different times during the day. Can you walk us through that one?
Yeah, so as the 2015, right, what we're seeing is over the years, the net load each day was going lower and lower. And at some point, I think it's that 2023, right there, maybe around 1 p.m., we actually went negative. So
Yeah, so
again, this is
Yeah, sorry, Daniel, just to be clear for everybody, the net load that we're talking about is the load after solar is subtracted, right? So the in excess to what solar is producing. So
Yeah, correct.
there was a time, right, when solar actually covered all those loads that were being on the grid from consumption, right? And solar was actually producing all of that.
So what the utilities argument was that these solar incentives, these net meterings were costing people who didn't go solar, right? The idea that the rich people were putting solar on, they were making the money, they were getting the payback at the expense of all the other people who didn't go solar, the poor people, essentially. So they used the duck curve and poor people as the excuse for this. That was the Public Accountability's Office. But if you kind of look at the other side of that story from the California Solar and Storage Association's perspective, they were saying essentially that they were counting the people's solar that they generated it as a cost to the other utilities. This is like saying that when you go to the grocery store and you don't buy produce because you grew it in your own garden, that should be counted as a loss to that grocery store. So it was really kind of playing the financial games. At the end of the day, we need more generation, not less. And without this solar payback period, we're seeing a lot of installation companies in California going out of business. And those solar installation companies were the same people doing the battery installations. Really, this kind of approach is at odds with the decarbonization of energy. So I want to make sure we have a balanced approach here, Nathan. Right? We know we need to absolutely have storage and solar to be in the mix, to not have this intermittency, but again, not have a solar cliff that where we drop off the cliff and we're now really hurting.
Yeah, a good point. And Daniel, I will just point out that some of the utilities are now making record profits in California, right? So it's less incentivized for people to send excess solar back to the grid. But there's an opportunity for those of us choosing to add batteries and solar to our homes, and that you can generate electricity. I just bought the panels, Daniel, I bought panels at 25 cents per watt. So I can generate electricity once I get those panels installed on my roof very cheaply. I bought over 10,000 watts worth of panels for about $2,500. Um,
Wow.
so,
Yeah.
so putting a power producing system into the home is great if you have a way to use that electricity. But just like you said, we don't necessarily use that electricity during the day. So I need to add batteries. And that's the reality under NEM 3.0 or net billing tariffs for most customers. I do want to point out we're about 2/3 of the way through, so I'm going to digress and let you move us along.
Thank you, Nathan. Absolutely. And again, I can't help but saying that something that has no moving parts, that has a 20 to 25-year warranty up there. So what I'm showing here is the different net meterings. Again, this is for California here, but what the one I kind of highlight really is, you know, credits for energy exports. I'm 3 down on the chart, right? It's the rate. You were getting that 1-to-1, but now they're paying you the price for that energy that could have been bought elsewhere on the wholesale market. Another thing I want to talk about, and Nathan, you mentioned this, is that we went from annual billing and annual true up to a monthly billing. It's still an annual true up in the sense that you can roll the credits over, but you're still going to have to pay that every month and look at that. One thing that's interesting is that they did allow you to install some extra solar, so you can kind of oversize your system. So I think they're looking towards more of the electrification of the grid as well. Again, we're just going to kind of reinforce this here. This kind of gray line here is what a home's load would look like without solar. So you use less energy during the nighttime. During the day, you start to use. In the evening, when you come home, you're going to use more, and then it's going to taper back down. This orange line here is what we're going to see with the typical home's loads or export when you have solar. So what we're showing here is nighttime. There's no solar, so we're importing from the grid. Again, this is solar only on this chart. Then we export during the middle of the day. And then
So
in
to
the
be clear,
evening,
Daniel,
when,
we're
yeah,
we're we're seeing the load, the building energy load going negative during the day. So I mean, this could be a small commercial facility or something. So what do we mean by the energy load going negative? It just means with solar, the building now is actually producing more energy than it's consuming?
exactly. And
Okay.
we're without a battery, we have to send it back to the grid. The problem, and we're going to show you here on a chart, that when you're sending energy back to the grid during the day, it's essentially worthless. You're not getting much monetary value for that. But when we start to consume in the afternoon, what we're also doing is coinciding with those time of use rates, which are mandatory now if anybody has gone solar. So this is it here, Nathan. This is the compensation rate. I just updated this today, and we're in June, or no, July. Sorry, Nathan. And right now we're on the West Coast here. We're coming up on 11 a.m. So if I come
Yeah.
down here and
Yeah.
look, I'm seeing that we're getting about, if you were to send solar back to the grid on your panels when you get them installed, Nathan, you get about 4 cents a kilowatt hour when you send back to the grid.
So
And
Daniel, this is a good point. So let me point something out. I don't have the electric vehicle plugged in right now. My wife's using it, not here. But if we were buying electricity from the grid, I would be paying 31 cents per kilowatt hour for that electricity. If I had solar on my roof and I was producing my own energy, right, I would be able to avoid that 31 cents per kilowatt hour. But if I was overproducing and not consuming it because I didn't have a vehicle plugged in, or I didn't have an air conditioner demand, or right, I didn't have the demand for it, I'm only going to be compensated 4.5 cents per kilowatt hour for that. So I buy it at 31, they'll compensate me at 4.5. I'm looking at this chart, 1600 hours, that's 4 p.m. I see that the electricity at 4 p.m. So if I'm overproducing electricity at 4 p.m., they're going to compensate me at 5 cents per kilowatt hour. I pay 51 cents per kilowatt hour, so it's over 10 times less than they charge me. And if you had a solar on your house and you were my neighbor and you were overproducing, essentially the electricity from your solar system would go up to the transformer and down in my house. I would be paying the utility 51 cents for that electricity. You would be compensated how much?
yeah, yeah,
5 cents.
yeah, and that's a great point, Nathan, is that when we do sell export, when we're exporting, we're not sending it on to the transmission lines across town. We're probably just feeding our neighbors. Now,
So
I think a lot of
Daniel, I
people's,
see green on here. Sorry to
yeah, that's
interrupt,
what I was
but
going
I
to
see
say is
green.
a lot of people's eyes are going to navigate towards that green. A couple of things on that. The old chart I had in here said $2. And what's difficult, I think that's so often they update these numbers, which makes the predicting the financial payback of solar plus storage systems difficult, because what can happen is that we can program these systems differently. These rates are changing. You can see all the different variables here. But Nathan, I think what somebody is going to want to do is program their system to discharge during August, right? What we want to do is, and we can absolutely program these systems to discharge the battery to the grid as long as the energy stored in the battery has come from solar, and we can start to make a financial profit on this. But last time, I think it was at $2, Nathan.
Yeah,
The
I can see that the compensation has significantly dropped on this chart. And I think it might be interesting to, provide the 2024 rates and 2025 rates, and look at those together. I would just note that, we just mentioned that if you were sending excess solar power out to the grid at 4 p.m., which your solar system would still be producing, you would get 5 cents per kilowatt hour today. If you actually waited and stored that energy in a battery until 2000 hours, which is 8 p.m.,
8 p.m.
you'd get 45 cents per kilowatt hour, so almost 10 times as much.
And
So
we're
if
going to talk about that as we keep going,
yeah,
Nathan. West-facing arrays. One thing I just want to make sure I highlight is a lot of this stuff came from California Solar and Storage Association. If you're not a member, you're in California, please consider joining. Otherwise, there's other state organizations as well.
so Daniel, go
So
back just 1 second. I
yeah,
want to look at this chart one more time. So next month in August, let's suppose you had a small, relatively small 20 kilowatt hour battery storage system on your house, and you decided to charge that battery storage system up from your solar during the day, excess solar that you produce, and discharge it in the evening. It looks like between 8 and 9 o'clock, you get dollar per kilowatt hour. So if you discharged an entire 20 kilowatt hours worth of energy or close to that back to the grid, it's $20 a day for those 2 hours, right? So $20 a day times 30 days in a month. How much payback is that? That's $600 in payback that you would get. Or
Absolutely.
okay, that's considerable.
Yeah.
Of course, that
Yeah,
does not
absolutely.
happen throughout the year. Most of the year, the peak rates of selling back are only 9 or 10 cents. So really, you
Yeah.
want to self-consume, but there are some months like August that you can get $600 back on your system.
For the sake of time, a lot of the hybrid inverters, including Solar, we can program. We don't have time to really run through this in detail, but this is how you would program a Solar to do exactly what we just talked about. And you could discharge the battery all the way down to maybe 5%, and then charge it back up to 20%, maybe using grid when it's cheap, so that if you do have an outage during the night, you have a little bit of backup available as well.
That's
So
a good
this was
point, Daniel. So again, those settings are called time of use settings. They can control when you use your battery energy, right? Or when you charge from the grid, when you sell to the grid, that kind of thing.
Yep. The idea, though, and looking at that chart again, Nathan, is Aurora Solar did this, and what they were showing here is that the idea is that what we do is we have more west-facing arrays. What we're showing here, this blue dashed line is our consumption curve. This black line here is our production curve, and this is kind of showing us here that when we're exporting, here we're exporting at the off-peak rate. This kind of orange or peach color here is when we're exporting at the peak rate. So the idea, again, is that what we do is we can shift the production curve to more overlap with the consumption curve when we get higher value for that solar, especially if we're looking at that rate structure.
Yeah, and Daniel, I think I would argue that this type of like a west-facing array is going to produce less electricity than a south-facing.
Yeah,
I would
total kilowatt
argue,
hours will be less.
yeah, I would argue that if you have considerable size energy storage, a south-facing array is going to be financially advantageous because you're going to produce more overall energy. But if you have a grid-tied system or a system with very small overall energy storage, you're going to want those batteries to be topped off towards the end of the evening so that you're not buying electricity. And for me, that peak time of not to buy electricity is between 6 p.m. and midnight. And I think many of the rates kind of incentivize you to avoid buying in those hours. So if you have a west-facing array, your solar lasts longer into the evening. So
Another
that's a
way
good point.
No, it's a great point, Nathan. Exactly. The other way to do this is to shift the consumption profile to match the production profile. And how we do that was with load shedding. So load shedding can be many things. Load shedding can be that we shed loads based on the power demands. Load shedding can mean we shed loads based on the energy reserves of the battery, the state of charge of the battery. But load shedding can also mean we drop loads based on certain times of the day. And what we can do is maybe have a hot water heater, and we can turn on the hot water heater during the day when the solar is producing. We have that electric hot water heater being warmed up by the solar, and then we turn the hot water heater off at night. It's a big thermal tank with this insulated, so it's going to retain that heat. So we're not charging up that hot water heater or powering that hot water heater when electricity is expensive. And there's many load shedding devices, Lumen, Span, Savant. But Nathan, I'm also seeing a lot of these being incorporated into the inverters themselves as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, there's some ways that you can program some of this equipment. Even with the new hot water heaters, you've got smart devices, right? But I will just say this. I mean, you can also just be an educated customer and do your electric drying. I mean, my wife does the laundry in the morning, right? We know the electricity is half price. So you can shift your demand in different ways. And one of them is just being more conscious of when you use electricity. I often, will go out and switch the hot tub on in the morning. I'll get it a little hotter because electricity is half price, and then I'll turn it off at 3 p.m. when the electricity prices start to rise.
Interesting things on this NEM. So if say you sell your home and you put solar on that home and you're on NEM 2.0, these net metering agreements were 20 years. So you still got 10 years, maybe 10 years ago you installed it. you got 10 years left on your NEM 2.0 system. You can sell your home. The new owners of the home will inherit the remaining 10 years. That was on the verge of going away. And if it wasn't for the hard work at CALSA to lobby the lawmakers, that is now still intact. That's a big win for us as well. Can you add a battery to an existing NEM 2.0 system and stay on that favorable system? Absolutely, you can. And Nathan, I would say that that kind of changes the dynamic of it. I would still actually export to the grid during the day, and then use my battery absolutely to still do the time of use, but to be able to have that for backup as
Yeah,
well.
and if your battery's full, right, because storage is expensive, right, you absolutely want to export to the grid, even if you're only making 5 cents a kilowatt hour, right? Daniel, we've got about 10 minutes left. One of the things I know is that those that are on this call are coming from across the nation, even across the world. Um, I think the moral here is or the theme here is to understand the billing of your customer so you can be an energy consultant, right? What are we looking at?
We're looking at some packages. Now, these packages are kind of good, better, best, I would say. On the far right-hand side, we have a Solarc 15K. Solarc, we've partnered with. The battery that you see there is our stacking 6.6 battery. As we talked about today, what we're doing is we're discharging and charging batteries daily. And when you do that, you want a battery that has a long cycle life. We have unlimited cycle life on our 10-year warranty. Nathan, you pointed out on that chart that you only have a 2-hour window to make all of your money. What we have is a battery that has a very rapid charge and discharge rate. So we can discharge that battery theoretically in 2 hours to the
Oh, even
grid.
less than that. Yeah, Daniel, these batteries have really high power output capabilities. Now, keep in mind, depending on how your inverter is connected to the grid, you might be limited. If you have a partial home backup system, you might have a 20 amp or a 40 amp breaker. But with a Solarc 15K, you could actually discharge this battery back to the grid in an hour and 20 minutes. Right? It's a very high discharge rate on the battery. Which means that when those peak compensation rates are there, you can discharge quickly. Or, in the case of electric vehicles, for instance, now I mentioned I don't have solar here at my house, but I do have it at my shop. And my wife will park the car there sometimes. It only costs about $18 or so to charge up our long range Model Y. But she can charge it there for free. And one of the nice things about this battery in a Solarc 15K is, she can charge quite quickly off of the battery. I also wanted to point out, I mean, you're showing indoor outdoor options here. One of the nice things about this Briggs Stratton battery, one of the things I like so much about it, is that reduced viscosity electrolyte that does a couple of things. One, it makes the battery more efficient. And two, it allows this battery to charge in colder temperatures, all the way down to 14 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's about almost 20 degrees lower than most of the competition. So this battery can be put on the outside of most locations. We do, of course, recommend if you're in a cold location to put it inside a garage. Try to keep it warmer because a battery is more efficient at warmer temperatures. A battery is going to be operationally most energy efficient, 99% energy efficient, when you're looking at temperatures between the 30 and 40 degrees Celsius range or between 80 and 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Right? You're getting a lot of efficiency there. And the battery can operate just fine all the way up to 122 degrees Fahrenheit. So a wide temperature range there. That's one of the advantages of this battery.
Without needing a heater.
Yeah,
And
without needing a heater, and heaters are parasitic loads. It's when you're heating things and that heat is escaping into the environment, essentially you're wasting electricity. So yeah, the electrolyte in this battery does give this battery a lot of advantages. Not just can you operate it outdoors at lower temperatures than the competition, but that you can operate it more efficiently too.
we
Daniel,
still do.
yeah,
Yeah,
go ahead.
thank you, Nathan. That's a great point about we do still offer heating options on our Phi and Amplify batteries on the left-hand side. These are great, especially the one on the far left for lead acid battery replacements. The battery on the far left, the Phi battery, still comes in 24 volts. So there's a lot of older 24 volt off-grid systems where we can support that. The ones on the far left don't have closed loop communications because a lot of the older Xantrax, Schneider equipment doesn't have closed loop comms. So that's a great battery for that. As long as we get the bulk, the float, the absorb, all those kind of program, and we have documentation that helps you program that equipment, you can go ahead and leverage that Phi battery. Amplify battery does have closed loop comms, but as Nathan had said earlier, and I really agree with him, is that I'm really excited about our new 6.6. It's not that new anymore, actually, Nathan. We've had it
Oh,
out for a
yeah.
while.
Yeah, we've got several thousand of these out across the country, and performance has been great. We've had very few issues, right? Installation is easy. Now, I did install some of these Amplify batteries, Daniel, in my previous house with a solar system, and they worked great. And they've got a 15-year warranty on them, right? So I don't want to, I don't want to discourage people from buying these, especially people that maybe have a setup that needs to have a system with integrated heaters. We see a lot of these Amplify batteries go into locations like Buffalo, New York, where my sister lives, or up to Alaska, right? To seeing installations happening up there where heaters are needed. 15-year warranty. So that's a great warranty. One of the things about the 6.6, though, that I like, and that's the battery I'm going to be installing in my garage pretty soon, is that these batteries go in very fast for installation, which means a reduced cost from your installer, but they're also a lower price per kilowatt hour as well.
Yep.
So a great overall battery choice. And Daniel, I know we're out of time here, but we've got
Well,
this high voltage battery.
yeah, and I wanted to ask you that, Nathan. And absolutely. So high voltage batteries, run them in series. That allows us to do commercial systems. But Nathan, we talked about this earlier at the beginning of the hour, that 30% tax credit for commercial and residential loans and PPAs is not going away. So absolutely, commercial doesn't necessarily have to be a three-phase system, but can you talk about maybe where you see the future of using either high voltage or maybe our traditional low voltage batteries in three-phase applications? And I think that would be a good use of the last few minutes that we have.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Daniel. I'm glad you brought it up. So we can absolutely use low voltage batteries, meaning our 48-volt nominal batteries, right? Which to produce three-phase power. So you can parallel inverters and do this. If you want to sell back to the grid, you're going to have a balanced three-phase power system. But you could produce three-phase power with two solar arc inverters or two EG4 inverters or two inverters, right? You can produce unbalanced three-phase power. And if you want balanced three-phase power where you've got the same amount of potential current flow, three inverters paralleled together will produce 208. I'm actually producing in my shop, Daniel. A lot of the things that I'm running are only running at 208.
Yeah.
And so what you can do is use just a single inverter. So I have a SolarArc 15K single inverter in the shop that's taking 208 in on two legs and producing 208 out. So you can absolutely program a single SolarArc to produce 208 power, two legs of it. And you have the ability, to use low voltage batteries, which have lower overall restrictions, lower overall requirements in terms of code.
Codes. Yep.
Yeah, to make a commercial system. So absolutely for like large commercial installations, we recommend that you reach out to our commercial team and consider using our high voltage batteries. But for those smaller overall commercial systems, they might be able to do that with low voltage batteries, and the 6.6 is a great battery.
Yeah, absolutely. As we're finishing off, thank you, Nathan. I then thought that was an important point, especially because of the 30% still being available for storage on the
Right.
ITC. If you've installed our battery, please consider joining our Elite IQ installer program. The QR code's there, or just give us a call. The phone number's up in the top right corner. If you have not installed our battery yet, the 6.6, we'll give you $1,000 off your first install. We're running some promos for $150 per battery for people that have installed, and we'll continue to get that at $100 a rate after the end of August as well.
So
Being part
Daniel,
of the, yeah.
this $1,000 promotion is available for a limited time. So this is one more reason for installers and homeowners to act before the end of the year, kind of act quickly to get that residential tax credit, act quickly to get this $1,000 off your system. And if they join the IQ program, they get more than $1,000 back, right? They're getting $1,300 back from us, 30% back from the ITC. And Daniel, we do reward our IQ installers continuously, right?
That's right. One of the things you get is we'll reimburse you for trip charges as well. We'll put you on the map and be able to send you referrals as well. Of course, we can always provide the extra training you need, and then we'll send you out some shirts, some swag out there. But the idea that we can also offer co-marketing capabilities as well. So again, the final thoughts of today's talk, and then we'll get to the NAPSEP email here in a second, is, these net metering incentives, they did help build the country's largest solar market. But the transition away to net billing tariff doesn't have to spell an end of solar. By pairing solar and storage with that load control I talked about, homeowners and businesses will still see returns on their NEM 3.0 as well.
Daniel, I think my final thought on the solar here is it is amazing how much the price of solar has declined over the years. We're seeing a similar reduction in the cost of batteries. And to me, that means that it's just becoming more and more advantageous for homeowners to generate their own electricity. And there's a certain fun in that as well. Being self-sufficient, generating your own electricity. And that's one of the things that makes me so passionate about solar and batteries, is that you can now grow your own electricity in the same way you used to be able to grow your own food, right? So now we can have our garden, we can have our solar garden too. How do they get the NAPSEP credits, Daniel?
Please email energystoragetraining@basco.com, Briggs and Stratton Company, BASCO. There's a survey there. We'd love to hear your feedback. Yeah, and Nathan, maybe you can even grow the own gasoline in your car too at the same time. Thank you, everyone. Again, if you're looking for NAPSEP credits, email energystoragetraining@basco. If you're looking for a free pass to RE+, email energystoragetraining@basco.com.
Thank you, everyone, for your attendance. Goodbye.